You know that feeling when you're just sitting there, totally lost in your own thoughts, and suddenly your phone buzzes with news that makes your stomach completely drop? Well, I want you to imagine that feeling, but scaled up to an entire country. Picture it. Out of the darkness, all you can feel is a heartbeat. Slow, heavy. It's the pulse of an entire nation, just going about its day, totally and blissfully unaware that its entire understanding of the world is literally seconds away from shattering. Completely. And then a gunshot rings out. In a fraction of a second, the bright, sunny optimism of a Texas afternoon is just torn apart. The course of modern history is violently altered right there in the open air, and nobody even knows what to do next. Suddenly, people are screaming in the streets of Dallas. A perfectly tailored pink suit is covered in blood. And live television, which you gotta remember, was a medium that had previously just shown smiling families and heavily scripted sitcoms, suddenly descends into absolute, unfiltered chaos. Millions of people are sitting in their living rooms, staring at a screen, watching something their brains can barely even process.
Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today we aren't just looking at a historical event. That's not what we're doing. We are going to perform a psychological autopsy on the exact moment the American mind broke. This is all about the trauma that completely rewired an entire culture and forever altered how you and I perceive the truth today.
Because think about it. What if the ultimate casualty of November 22nd, 1963, wasn't just a political leader? What if the real victim, the thing that actually died that day, was our collective faith in institutions, our faith in the media, even our faith in reality itself? To really grasp this profound shift, we have to look at what America actually was right before those bullets were fired. So let's step back into the 1950s for a second. The American dream was at its absolute peak, right? Perfect lawns, perfect families, a booming era of middle-class prosperity. But it was a complete illusion. Underneath that shiny, manicured suburban sunlight, society was exhausted. It was terrified. Families were quietly building bomb shelters in their backyards. The Cold War had turned existential fear into just a daily lifestyle. It was a country functioning on pure, unadulterated anxiety. And the pressure? It was escalating so rapidly. Look at how much tension was bubbling just beneath the surface. In 1955, you have the profound, painful racial fractures being exposed by the murder of Emmett Till and the bus boycotts, really tearing at the fabric of the nation's supposed unity. By 1960, the very first televised presidential debate fundamentally shifts how we even perceive power. Suddenly, politics is a visual performance. And then, October 1962, the world-ending, absolute terror of the Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days where the world almost ended. And that brings us right to the edge in November 1963. The psychological reality here is that America was overheating. Seriously overheating. We were an empire hiding this intense, deep-rooted anxiety behind a mask of unshakable confidence. The country was practically begging for a charismatic, confident savior to appear and just make it all feel safe again. And right on cue, a young senator from Massachusetts steps onto the stage. Out of this boiling anxiety, two figures emerge, and they are on a totally inevitable, tragic collision course. On one side, you have John F. Kennedy, the golden symbol of youth, hope, energy, and power. And on the exact opposite side, you have Lee Harvey Oswald, the ultimate invisible man, a guy representing absolute alienation and chaos. But here's the thing about that golden symbol. It was a carefully crafted performance. Behind his polished, incredibly confident smile, Kennedy was actually battling severe, chronic back pain. He suffered from Addison's disease and was entirely dependent on steroids. He was a man shaped by unbelievable physical suffering and by this crushing, immense pressure to replace his perfect older brother, Joe Jr., who had died tragically. Kennedy wasn't just a politician. He was the first leader to truly master the psychological power of televised perception. He gave a frightened nation exactly the image of perfect health and strength it so desperately craved. And then there's Oswald. And honestly, this is where history starts to feel uncomfortably, almost terrifyingly modern. Oswald had an emotionally fractured, deeply isolated childhood. He had this desperate, aching need for identity and meaning, which led him to just drift aimlessly through the Marines, through communism, through anything that would have him. He is, essentially, the 1960s version of today's doom scroller. A lonely, totally alienated young man trapped in his own internal chaos, desperate to be significant in a world that completely ignores him. Which brings us to the climax of all this tension. Dealey Plaza, November 22, 1963.
The festive, open-top motorcade is rolling through the sunny streets. Everyone is smiling. And then, the tension finally snaps. 3 shots are fired from the Texas Schoolbook Depository. In an instant, raw, unfiltered trauma is broadcast directly into millions of living rooms. Time literally slows down, and the nation's collective memory fractures in real time.
Shortly after the chaos, police track Oswald down to a movie theater. When they arrest him and drag this bruised, bewildered guy in front of the flashing cameras, he yells out a phrase that changes everything. "I'm just a patsy." In that single, panicked sentence, he plants an immortal seed of mass paranoia that, honestly, we're still harvesting today.
Almost instantly, the American public is just bombarded with questions. Was he really acting alone? Was it the Soviets? Was it the mafia? The CIA? Because psychologically speaking, we are entirely unequipped to accept randomness. When a tragedy is this massive, this earth-shattering, our brains desperately reject the idea that a random, emotionally empty man could take down the leader of the free world. We need it to make sense. We need a villain that is exactly as big as the trauma itself.
And just as the entire nation is practically begging for answers, for some kind of logical explanation, the absolute unthinkable happens. Just 2 days later, the only suspect who could possibly offer any real closure is murdered on live television by Jack Ruby. The trigger is pulled right in front of millions of people, severing our connection to a clean, objective truth forever.
In the aftermath of that, reality itself basically split into 2. Look at this divide. The government, through the Warren Commission, offered this very clean, definitive narrative. Oswald acted completely alone, driven by the random violence of a disturbed mind, and the case is officially closed. But the American public? They felt a totally different reality. To them, there were just too many coincidences to ignore. It had to be a larger hidden conspiracy. The government's explanation felt profoundly hollow. And this exact disconnect, this is the birthplace of modern conspiracy culture. Institutional trust was permanently broken.
This is the exact moment that marks the origin of institutional paranoia. It's that terrifying sinking realization in the back of your mind that maybe there are no adults in charge. That the systems we rely on are incredibly fragile, that governments hide the truth to protect themselves, and that history isn't shaped by careful, calculated control. It's shaped by irreversible, unpredictable chaos.
So you might be wondering, why does this matter to you today? Why do we care so much about a motorcade from over 60 years ago? Because the alienation, the heavy skepticism, the algorithmic outrage, and the deep media distrust we experience right now literally every single time we unlock our phones, all of that was fundamentally born in the ashes of that broadcasted trauma in Dallas. It was the exact moment that an endless search for hidden meanings started. Paranoia became permanent.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. November 22nd didn't just assassinate a president, it assassinated our collective innocence. It proved once and for all that once trust dies inside a society, reality itself is suddenly up for debate. And as history shows us time and time again, once a society loses that baseline trust, it almost never fully gets it back.
I want to leave you with this haunting thought from Kennedy himself. The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, but the myth. It's an eerie, perfectly timed reminder that our deepest struggles today aren't just with finding the facts. Our true struggle is with untangling the myths we built to survive the chaos of a world we realize we can't fully control. So, what myths are you holding on to today?